We ask that you take a moment to watch this short safety presentation. Emergency exits are located throughout the venue and are easily identified by illuminated green and white exit signs. Please now take a moment to locate your nearest emergency exit. Remember, the nearest exit may be located behind you. For your safety, please keep all aisles and exit paths clear at all times. In the unlikely event of an emergency alarm, a flashing warning light will be activated. Please remain calm and listen for further instructions. If you are required to evacuate the building, an announcement will be made in both English and Arabic. In the event of an emergency evacuation, please move swiftly to the nearest emergency exit. Some venues, such as the theatre and auditoria, have illuminated escape path lighting to guide you to the nearest emergency exits. Please follow the instructions given by the fully trained QNCC staff and move quickly to the nearest emergency exit, following the signs until you are outside the building. Once outside, you will be directed to the nearest assembly point where you will receive further instructions. If you discover a fire, please raise the alarm using a manual call point. This will immediately activate the emergency evacuation sequence. All alarms will be responded to by the QNCC team. If you require first aid assistance, please approach a member of the QNCC team. QNCC is a non-smoking venue, and smoking is not permitted at any time in any part of the venue. Should you wish to smoke, please use the designated smoking areas which are located outside the building. Thank you for watching. On behalf of all of us at Qatar National Convention Centre, we hope you enjoy a safe and memorable visit.
ضيوفنا الكرام، يرجى الالتزام بأخذ مقاعدكم ريثما تبدأ الجلسات بعد قليل. Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to your seats as the sessions will start within a few moments. خلي لك معي.
الأخير من مؤتمر الدوحة الدولي للإعاقة والتنمية الذي سيتوج بإعلان الدوحة الذي نأمل أن يكون خارطة طريق لجميع الحكومات حول العالم ومنارة ترشدهم إلى كيفية دمج فئة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في خططهم التنموية.
وعلى بركة الله تنطلق أولى فعاليات اليوم بجلسة تحت عنوان الأطفال ذوي الإعاقة تحديات حقوق الإنسان والمجتمع المحلي، ترأسها البروفيسورة جينيفر لينن الأستاذة في كلية الصحة العامة بجامعة هارفارد، فلتتفضل مشكورة.
Good morning. It's an honor and a privilege for us on this panel to talk with all of you, distinguished guests, people of vast experience, on the topic of children's rights and disability. We thank Her Highness Sheikha Mosa bin Nasser for her vision and guidance in making this conference such a success. Yesterday was wonderful. Today is also going to be great. Our panel proceeds as follows. Professor Jacqueline Baba from Harvard will give the keynote. Dr. Jumana Odeh from the Palestinian Happy Child Center, also affiliated with Harvard, will then give remarks. She will be followed by Dr. Musharraf Hussain, who will speak from his experience. I will contribute a few comments to close our panel discussion. And we will have a period, I hope, of brief interaction among the panelists, and then we aspire to have time to have questions with all of you. So to begin this, I will ask Professor Baba to come to the podium and give the keynote. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd also like to thank Her Highness Sheikha Mosa bin Nasser, Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here and to give the keynote this morning. So I'd like to start my brief comments with a good example. In the Iraqi region of Kurdistan, a post-war conflict facing dire economic shortages and other challenging circumstances, we find a wonderful example of a program where already 10 years ago, well over 2,000 children with disabilities were flourishing, their human rights respected, their surrounding community fully engaged and supported. What are the key elements of this program? I think they are three. Firstly, a committed government intervention. In this case, direct support of the Iraqi Kurdistan Ministry of Education. Second, financial and technical support from UNICEF and programming that focused on early intervention. Third, inclusive mainstreaming of all children within regular schools and supported incentivization of resourcefulness and innovation among teachers. The result? Flourishing children and highly motivated teachers. So here is a quick vignette, a personal first-person account from that situation by a teacher. I participated in a training course to be a support teacher for children with disabilities in the city of Erbil. I was placed in a school and assigned to work with a child with autism. I found the behavior of the child very challenging. Hearing about my situation, officials from the Ministry of Education came to visit our school. They spoke for a long time with me, the family and the school leadership, about the rights of the child. They also came to the classroom and gave us practical advice, and they promised follow-up visits and support. Realizing the importance of my job, I persevered in it, despite my original hesitation. The student is now fully accepted in the school and is making progress in the classroom. He has a musical talent and even had a role in a musical clip made to raise awareness of autism, and I thought I could just play you a minute from that clip. So the teacher continues, now, even if you asked me to leave, I would carry on and do my teaching job voluntarily. So if this can be achieved in post-war Iraq, it surely should be possible to achieve this in most places on earth. I start with this beautiful example of a child whose life is now rewarding and joyous to highlight the main argument we seek to advance. The consequences of disability result from the interaction between a person and an environment rather than a human being and a disease or a malfunction. And this general point, of course, applies to children as much as it does to adults. Children are disabled or empowered by the society they live in, and their related joy or suffering results from the supports or obstacles placed in their way or removed from their path, rather than from inevitable consequences of their physical or intellectual conditioning. This approach, this framing, should encourage us to approach children with disabilities from a radically different perspective than the one universally prevalent until just 40 to 50 years ago. That prior approach, as we all know, that regarded people with disabilities as misfits, as burdens, as uneducable, a source of shame for families, pariahs, best kept out of sight to avoid embarrassment or ridicule. Alas, however, our global environment and many domestic environments continue to disempower children with disabilities. Here are some rather somber statistics. So consider just 3 issues. Firstly, the question of violence. As you can see, and I hope you can read this, children with disabilities are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience physical and sexual violence and neglect compared to non-disabled children. Second, exclusion from school. Only 10% of children with a disability are in any form of school, compared to over 95% of children worldwide. Only 5% of children with disabilities will graduate even from primary school. And the vast majority of children and young people with disabilities do not progress to secondary or tertiary school. And finally, the question of institutionalization. In the Central and East European region in particular, a child with a disability is estimated to be 17 times as likely to be institutionalized as one who is not disabled. So these dangers, violence, exclusion, institutionalization, speak to these statistics, speak to dangers in the home, in the school, and in the community. At the intersection of two powerful vectors of discrimination, disability on the one hand and childhood on the other, children with disabilities have experienced a long and painful history of suffering, of abuse and of marginalization, which literature and art have portrayed for centuries. So what are some of the challenges that these children face? Just consider 4. First, acute stigma, prejudice, often manifesting itself in bullying or ridicule in the community, even amongst government agencies and service providers. Secondly, frequent discrimination and denial of even basic needs or accommodations, with the result that only 5 to 15% of children and adults who need assistive devices and technologies ultimately receive them. Thirdly, shockingly, poverty. Whereas disabled people make up about 10% of the global population, they make up 20% of the global population living under the poverty line. 10%, 20%. And finally, exacerbated hardship in conflict or disaster. Forced migration and other emergencies particularly affect autistic and other intellectually disabled children. So these are very serious challenges. But change has come, and though there's still a long way to go, in some ways one could say that change has come relatively fast, with dramatic impacts on both the normative and the socio-political environment that obtains in many contexts where disabled children lead their lives. In many countries now, there are constitutions that guarantee equality and non-discrimination to persons with disabilities. In some countries, as you can see from this map, such as Canada, Mexico, South Africa, Ethiopia, Thailand, Somalia, the Constitution guarantees equality and non-discrimination. What are the main drivers of this change, and what do they contribute to our current understanding and our current practice in the field of children with disabilities? I think it would not be a secret to anyone in this room to say that the drivers are many, a confluence of years of advocacy and research by dedicated parents, insightful scientists, early childhood researchers, policymakers, public servants, and other experts, but also, and related, the dramatic strides in international law and gradual progress in social norm change across social classes, cultures, and generations. We can see the impact of these processes if we look at the landscape relating to inclusive education for children with disabilities. And here you see that only very few countries have low integration or no special education at all. By contrast, many have a high degree of integration available. So this is progress. It's significant progress. Of course, availability is not the same as real access. And as I said, only 10% of children with disabilities are in any form of school at all. So much progress remains to be accomplished. So turning briefly to the human rights framework. This year, 2019, is a significant year. Both the two key pieces of international law relevant to children with disabilities mark important anniversaries. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the seminal international treaty addressing children's rights, turns 30 this year. One might say that it has become a young adult. And meanwhile, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities turns 13, a young teenager. Each of these treaties mark a milestone in thinking about the population with which they're concerned. I don't have time to go into details, but I do want to highlight a couple of key provisions which are shared between these two conventions. Most important, perhaps, is the prohibition on discrimination, a prohibition which is often mentioned but not often unpacked. What the prohibition on discrimination means is that the quintessential human dignity that inheres in everyone, irrespective of their age, their physical or mental condition, has to take precedence over any other exclusionary context. Sorry, I think I'm a slide behind. So here you have, I just pulled out from the two conventions the prohibition on discrimination. And I want to say that I think this foregrounding of this prohibition marks a profound insight and actually a radical statement. It means, for example, that segregation is intolerable because separate institutions, whether for education or for healthcare or for living, unless they are necessary, are inherently unequal. It means that relevant differences have to be addressed appropriately, not by lowering standards or denying opportunities, but by instituting the necessary accommodations. The prohibition on discrimination also means that a child, however young, is entitled to have his or her best interests taken into account. We know now, what we didn't know as clearly half a century ago, that early interventions can make a dramatic difference in the life course, that trauma inflicted at an early age, for example, by abusive or inadequate institutional care, can have lifelong impacts, in some cases generating what the Harvard Center on the Developing Child has called toxic stress. We also know, conversely, that appropriate, nurturing, and stimulating early interventions can radically change a child's life course, facilitating the development of capacities that might otherwise be left dormant or underdeveloped. So early childhood development, ECD, applies to children with disabilities, of course, just as much as it does to those without. The imperative of early intervention, of familial support, of appropriate stimulation and engagement are increasingly recognized as benchmarks for later developmental success. But they depend on a systemic and holistic structure capable of delivering those inputs, a structure, in other words, that promotes integration across departmental divides, for example, across health, social welfare, housing, childcare, education, finance, income assurance. A second provision common to both the CRC and the CRPD is the emphasis on participation as a crucial element of a rights-based approach. In the children's rights context, participation correlates with the right to a voice, the right to be heard, to have one's opinions solicited in the first place. This approach, of course, contrasts with the more traditional but still pervasive notion that children deserve to be seen but not heard. They deserve protection as family possessions, that only parents are charged with their care, their tutelage, their discipline. The CRC, by contrast, stresses the idea that children are rights bearers, that their opinions matter, that their views, especially as they move from young childhood to adolescence, need to be solicited and attended to. And in a similar vein, the CRPD emphasizes the centrality of participation. As you all know, nothing about us without us. The notion that persons with disabilities, including children, should be their own spokespersons has radical implications. It forces experts to step back, to observe or to listen carefully, to be modest about our understanding and knowledge, and to be receptive to the views and criticisms and opinions that are offered, whether through speech or movement or sound or just simple expression by disabled people, including by disabled children themselves. Non-discrimination and participation, therefore, are key elements of a rights-based approach to children with disabilities. But they are both very challenging to implement. In many, the majority of contexts, it's far easier to get experts to decide what is right or good for a child with disabilities than to patiently observe or engage with the child himself or herself and proceed from the ground upwards building on what the child has to offer and what the child needs. And yet, this is what a participatory approach requires: the luxury of patient observation time, the gentleness of listening out for cues as to what is needed or wanted. And of course, related to this is the question of resources, the allocation of appropriate budgets, the availability of needed political commitment to mobilize the needed resources. Given prevailing rates of poverty, which I already mentioned, however, particularly among families with disabled members, the imperative of adopting a so-called universal design approach is evident. Most children with disabilities and their families cannot afford to individually acquire specialist products or services. Rather, societies as a whole must, as far as feasible, design and install the products, environments, programs, and services that are usable by all people. Ramps and braille signs are simple examples, but so much more remains to be done. It follows that though much progress has been made, we are still a long way from realizing the non-discrimination and the participation goals that I mentioned. Large-scale challenges remain to implement these goals. But let us conclude, like I started, with an inspiring example, one which illustrates how, again, without large resources, so much can be done to realize the rights of every disabled child to a life of dignity and happiness, free from exclusion, violence, or stigma. So this time, I'm going to adopt the voice not of a teacher, but of a parent, a Palestinian parent, who speaks about her child, and I quote, "When he was born, I was dreaming that he will become a doctor or a lawyer, but he became a shepherd, and he's happy. My first son, Michael, was born different. He wasn't like other kids. He has autism. It took us a lot of time and effort to understand what that means and how to deal with him. He couldn't talk till he was 5. We were referred to the Palestinian Happy Child Center by a nursery teacher in our village when our son was 3. And my husband and I were wondering, why do they spend so much time giving him speech therapy sessions when he can't even talk? But then he did talk later, and he continued to be different. It was so difficult for him to enter any school, except for the school that was affiliated to the church in our village. They did accept him. And so together with the center team, the school helped Michael on his different path. Since he was a little child, we'd noticed that he loves animals, and he has his own way to play and relax with animals. We happen to have neighbors who are shepherds, and we were advised by the Happy Child Center to let Michael play with our neighbor's sheep. Now he's 23, and his younger brother is 20, also didn't finish school, also a slow learner. And so, for the last 3 years, both my boys have been working with our neighbors as shepherds, but with no salary. They're happy, but I'm not happy. I keep thinking, we're poor, and my sons should make a living. It can't continue like this. And so one day I talked to our neighbor, and I said to him, it's not fair for my 2 sons to take care of your sheep with no return. And he said, but I feed them all day long, and I keep them busy, and they're happy. And I said, but I'm not happy. And then he suggested that he'll give me 2 sheep in return for one son's work, and the other will work and get food for the animals instead of money. And so my neighbor agreed, and now we have 7 sheep, and my 2 sons are happily taking care of all the animals. I'm looking to get a loan to start a small business for my sons. Today, I'm so thankful to the center staff because they believed in my kids and helped me understand my sons and give them as much as I can. So in conclusion, I think we're all thankful for the dedicated interveners who enable all children, whatever their disability or circumstances, to enjoy the human rights that all children with disabilities are entitled to. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to start with a message that I got from the family of Happy Child Center and the moms and dads of our kids. They are so thankful to Qatar and to Her Highness Sheikh Mouza bint Nasser because 30 kids, Palestinian kids, were offered cochlear implant and they were born deaf, and now they are 10, 13 years old, and all of them are in regular schools, enjoying their life as other kids. I will have some slides about the Happy Child Center to show who we are and what we do, but I'll give two stories. I'll speak about two kids from the PHCC, practical stories. Yusuf was 2 years, 7 months when he accompanied his parents to the doctor appointment for his mom. So the doctor, he was born with Down syndrome. So the doctor tried to talk to Yusuf. Hi, how are you? What's your name? So immediately the parents answered, don't you see? He has Down syndrome. He's Mongoli, huwa Mongoli, between brackets, and he can't speak, he doesn't understand. So the doctor knows about, it happened that he has his clinic in the same street where the Happy Child is, so he referred them to us. He advised the parents if they can come and have a consultation with us. So that was the first time I met Yusuf. After those years, actually, Yusuf was enrolled in the Happy Child Center programs, and he got all the support that he needed. And he was enrolled in one of the kindergartens. We trained his teacher at the kindergarten, other caregivers, and he was admitted to a public school to be the first child with Down syndrome to go to the first grade in his village, first grade class in his village. And by time, we noticed that more kids coming from the same area, from the same villages around, all of them, they have Down syndrome, and the parents always refer to Yusuf as a happy child and as a loving and lovely young child. After a while, actually Yusuf now is 15, he's 17 years old. When he was 15, we helped him enter a vocational training center for carpentry. The other day, he's 17 now, the other day he came to visit, but he came with a friend. It happened that he met with Ahmed's father. His friend is Ahmed, so he met with Ahmed's father in the mosque when he went with his father to the mosque. And Ahmed's father asked Yusuf's father, I have a child who's 6 years old, but he doesn't speak, and where did you go with Yusuf? This time, Yusuf didn't wait till his father answered. He answered. He said, I'll take you where I used to go when I was little. He brought him to the Happy Child. Another story, but I read it because it was written by a father of a girl, so let me read it. She's my sunshine. After 11 long years, Amal was born to shine our lives. Amal was born. Amal means hope in Arabic. At the age of 3, she was diagnosed of having autism. We were told it's high-functioning autism, which means a mild form of autism. It was the first time for my wife and I to hear about such a disease, in brackets. We were taught that it's not a disease, it's a condition. We've heard about the PHCC from a mother of a child who has the same condition. Then we went to the PHCC seeking help and proper treatment. There we got the hope that Amal has a good potential, but we have to work hard in close cooperation with the PHCC staff. She was given all the needed services in a comprehensive way: speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavioral therapy, and we got lots of consultation and support. They helped us in including Amal in education system. They trained her teacher and other caregivers, including the bus drivers and the cleaners. They visited us at home, met with our extended family members, in order to prepare the best environment for Amal to accommodate her needs. Amal now is 8. She goes to a public school. She enjoyed her friends and school. She is as happy as her peers, with very mild and unnoticeable autistic behaviors. Me and my wife are both teachers. After school, I work in a chocolate shop to increase my income and to offer Amal the life she deserved and meet all her needs. The other day, a lady came to the chocolate shop. She looked familiar. So I asked her, is she related to the PHCC doctor? She answered, yes, she's my sister. I found myself telling my daughter's story and how much help we received from the Happy Child. I wanted everybody in the shop to know that my daughter has autism and how grateful we are to the PHCC. I was so proud of my daughter and her progress, and I was free for the first time to express my feelings since she was born. She is my sunshine. Also, I would like to thank my very dear friend, Mrs. Amal Mannai, for this opportunity that she gave to all of us. And for the Happy Child kids, she has, a very big thankful and a hug for Amal. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Professor Baba has given and covered almost all aspects of disability inclusion, and Jamuna has shared 2 excellent stories. So let me talk about community mobilization, a social change for disability inclusion. And I would like to share with you another story of a girl with a disability. When I first went to the community in a rural village of Bangladesh, her name was Shapla. The meaning of the name was lotus. My role was to bring that invisible flower to be visible. Shapla was affected by polio like me at age 3. Her disability was not welcomed by the wider family. When his father, who had mental health problem, died, she with her mother left the father's house and took shelter in the house of maternal's grandfather. She has no mobility, no social interactions, no hope. Her mother wanted to overcome the challenges, sending her to school. Shapla joined the local grassroots disabled people's organizations, DPOs, that helped her to get admission into local school. She was graduated, but she did not get job yet. This is a story of half success. Our society progressed a lot, but it is not fully transformative yet. As a consultant of UNICEF, when I did situation analysis of children with disabilities in Bangladesh, we found the realization of rights of children with disabilities is uneven. On one hand, there is a highly inclusive, specialized international standard intervention. On the other hand, there is a very limited or no resources in the community, especially in the rural areas. That is the majority world, and I am fighting for them. because I came from that context. This is the scenario in every community in the low and middle-income countries. How we can overcome these challenges? I suggest addressing three areas. The first and foremost is addressing poverty. We all know that poverty is the cause and consequence of disability. The stunting is the major cause of disability and secondary empowerment. The first goal of sustainable development is reducing poverty everywhere and of everyone. And disabled people from up to their age of 6, they need support, nutritious food for their cognitive development. So we need to ensure that they have food at the right time and also to address their hunger. And the 2030 agenda had said social protections. That is one of the intervention we need to ensure, especially for the people who are furthest behind. But we need to do more than that, education and employment. We talked about that in this forum yesterday. And second one is stigma and discrimination. Professor Baba told about that. Stigma starts at home, but not every home. It is not in my family. It gave me a lot of support. That's why I'm here today. Social belief reinforces discriminatory practice. Discrimination creates harm for the development of children with disabilities. So we need to address that. And how we can do that? Social awareness is crucial. But there is also other intervention that we practice in the rural village of Bangladesh, like sports for development and theater for development. Those are very transformative intervention that educate the people and also it bring confidence and positive image of disabled people in the community. And third one is disability and intersectionality. It is also told before. That is when disability intersect with other social issues like gender, discrimination exacerbate. Girls and women with disabilities face double challenge. They face gender-based violence, abuse, and sexual harassment. We should take both social and legal actions to protect children with disabilities, because violence is crime. So we need to change the perspective of the society. But I think we should go for legal actions. And we did that in Bangladesh. There is 200 cases we filed. And also we did social campaign engaging the community people, the media and others. So I can tell you another story. Her name was Smotara. She has psychosocial disability and she could not talk and interact. She was abused, and after a few months we became pregnant. And we did serious social mobilization on that. And as a result of that, the incidence of such kind of things reduced in the community. So yes, we need global policy. At the same time, we should have local action so that those things happen. And overall, I have, for doing these things, I have 3 strategic recommendations so that children with disabilities live safely and they get benefit of the CRPD and Sustainable Development Goal. I think we should take cross-sectoral interventions, early childhood development, inclusive employment, education, employment, or even transport. All these are disability-related indicators of Sustainable Development Goal. I'm suggesting cross-sectoral intervention because we have seen that Safla was admitted into schools, she has graduated, but she did not go job. So unless there is no hope to go further, the family and the community will not be motivated to send the children to the schools for further development. So it is not only one intervention, we need multiple interventions to change the life and transform the society. And the second is multi-stakeholder approach. Disability is a complex issue. it is very difficult for one organization or a group of people. As we need, that is, as a duty bearer, the government has responsibility. I think the corporate sectors are now playing important role. I didn't know before that Professor Bhabha is so active in disability sector. So I think we need academia, research, new knowledge. Through that way, I think, and at the end, the civil society and DPOs, we together can make this world more disability inclusive. And third one is ensuring participation and voice of children with disabilities. Article 7 of CRPT says that state parties shall ensure that children with disabilities have the right to express their views freely on all matters affecting with them. So they should have voice and views for everything, what we are doing, and even the family or the states is taking responsibility for them, as I mentioned, for education, employment, or early childhood. The theme of this year's International Disability Day was promoting empowerment of people with disabilities and their leadership to achieve the 2030 Development Agenda. We need to empower and develop their leadership for systemic change, for inclusion, and to achieve 2030 Agenda. It also gives them a spirit of the disability movement, nothing about us without us. So in conclusion, I'd like to stress the harness of sustainable development to achieve CRPD. I would like to also add the other commitments of Global Disability Summits. Those are key for the operationalization of SDGs and CRPD by multi-stakeholders. I wanted to believe that Doha Declaration will advance the global commitments to change the lives of adult, women, youth, and children with disabilities in the community of Qatar and also in the countries. I'll add few sentences from the practitioner's perspective, that is, harnessing of power of SDG and CRPD is very important. But who are the drivers behind it? Who can take this issue forward? Persons with disabilities or disabled people's organizations. But the key challenge we are facing now is they have less capacity. But in some places, they have even more capacity. So it totally depends on the context and their capacity. So now we need to empower them and build their capacity so that disabled peoples, along with other stakeholders, can take positive action to make our society and the community inclusive for all, including ours. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Is it okay? Thank you. Okay. So we have had this talk and tremendous comments from our panelists. I would just like to add one more element in this conversation, which is the combined impact of armed conflict, precipitous climate change, and forced migration on the fate and trajectory of people with disabilities, particularly young people and children. I studied these three issues, and over the years, because of changes in wars and human behavior in relationship to the ecosystem, the phenomenon of forced migration is very much intertwined with armed conflict and climate change. And if we look at the recent wars in the last 10 years, Syria and Yemen and others, we can see that the international restraints and law on the conduct of war are fraying and actually turning out to be really insufficient, so that civilians are increasingly targeted, their homes and shelters are destroyed, and they are forced to move as a deliberate tactic of war. We also see increasingly intense disasters because of our interaction with the natural environment. And again, populations are forced to flee. When you think about forced migration and look at the families that have to make choices about when and whether to move. An entire family is effectively disabled by the fact of their having a child who begins before these assaults with a physical disability or a cognitive disability, and who, because of the war, may also then be additionally disabled because of the targeting, landmines, cluster weapons, chemical weapons. And people need to move very quickly. If you saw how fast the requirements were for the Kurds along the Turkish border with the sudden shift in political support for the United States, they had hours to move. And in the photos, think about how people bundled into wagons, went into jeeps and cars, and fled south quickly. If you have a 1 or 2-year-old who is cognitively impaired, you will not have time to acclimatize this child to the movement, but at least you can pick him or her up, and even with the vociferous protests of that child, pack him into some place and leave. But if you have an older child with intellectual disability of some form, they rely on structure and consistency and routine, and they pick up and react in adverse ways to the stress in a family unit. Families are slowed down. They never abandon, they rarely abandon their disabled child, but they are slowed down in the process of flight. And this creates tremendous burdens and strains, and in many ways seals their fate in negative ways. So when we are speaking about the fate of the world, international norms, and children with disabilities, I would just like to underscore the fact that they are at the very precipitous point of inflection in terms of their suffering from these large-scale social and natural movements. So with those comments and with the rich array that you have heard from our panelists and keynote speaker, I would like to open the floor for questions. I'm sorry we don't have too much time for a back and forth, if that's okay. But I think we have time for 2 to 3 questions from the floor. And what I would ask is if the people who have microphones, we could hear from 2 questions, and then we can have panelists respond as appropriate. So I can't see, actually, who has, because of the lights, who has their hand raised. So I must rely on those of you in the audience with mics to hand people, etc. So please raise your hand. Don't be shy. We need to hear from you. You came here on a morning to listen and now interact. So is anybody raising their hand?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, it's Bonnie from Disabled Women's Network in Canada. Thank you to all the panelists for your incredible interventions this morning. One of the things that I heard coming from several of you was really framing things around an intersectional way forward. And the notion, again, of children, women with disabilities, and the particular vulnerability we can think of. But again, the resilience. And I think it is important for us to think of some of the more positive ways that we can start to frame this discussion around intersectional human rights and the idea that we need to move beyond our own community to a broader discourse about the way we move forward to include everyone. And so I was just interested to have somebody from the panel come back to this idea of how we begin to not just talk about intersectional human rights, but actually apply an intersectional lens to policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to talk about this? Perhaps, Mishara, if you would like to bring that up, and then, I mean, your talk was about that. But you're in a good position to speak about highlighting
Yes, I
intersectionality.
think this issue is being discussed in many different fora, and organizations take it forward because, as I told before, that is disability is a complex issue. It is not one-dimensional. So I think so. We are at this moment we are considering that. That is when we are going to the community, as we are considering them. That is, they are being vulnerable because of disability. At the same time, gender issues there. So as an ADD, as an international organization, we are supporting women with disabilities in Tanzania to address the both dimensions. And we will bring those learning in the policy in the Tanzania's context. At the same time, now in this time, like Beijing Plus 25 is being reviewed. So we are giving input in that process so that both gender and disability issue is addressed, and then in that policy document, and at the end, then that will be implemented later on.
Thank you. And Jumana, I mean, you mobilize entire communities to take care of children. So intersectionality is basically what you practice.
Yeah, and in fact, I would like to add a small comment that watching the wars in other Arab countries in the media, I always felt that maybe we can, the Happy Child can be an example with the same language, cultural sensitive to the area, and also it would be an opportunity to spread the model in other Arab countries, and it is very community-oriented, multidisciplinary approach, and might be helpful for other people to benefit from. Again, when you mentioned about checkpoints or how it's difficult for people to move, even Yusuf, I remember, sometimes he would come, he will say, only 2 checkpoints, not 4 or not 5. So it was, he was happy that at least, because sometimes it would take 2 hours to reach 4 sessions. So yes, it is very important point that you mentioned about moving around, especially under political conflict.
Thank you. And Jackie, you were speaking about, and it came up yesterday, about the necessity for people who are deeply steeped in one or another of the human rights documents to basically see how they interact and how you can mobilize the advantage of interaction.
Yes, I'm so glad this question was raised. I think it's both across different human rights dimensions, whether it's children's rights, women's rights, disabled people's rights, but it's also across different sections of government that we often don't think about, like finance or justice, you know, mainstream, rich, powerful departments that are very rarely at the table on social issues. Those are the departments that really need to be brought into the conversation so that our issues are mainstreamed. Because as long as it's just seen as a welfare issue, or just seen as an education issue, or just seen as a women's issue, we're always going to be at the end of the list and at the bottom of the rung. So I do think that it is critical to see these as responsibilities that pervade the whole society, and I'm very glad you brought that point up.
Thank you for that question. Another one. Hello. Way in the back, I see a hand.
This is, hello?
Oh, hello. Sorry, okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Venkatesh. I am the chair of the CBR Global Network. I think multisectoralism and cross-sectoral cooperation cannot be restricted to only persons with disabilities. It could be across the board for all issues. And so for so long as we isolate ourselves, this needs to be only for persons with disabilities. And we go the same way of being in a cocoon, as I said yesterday. My observation is, I think we seriously need to have a global understanding on what is community inclusive development. And this needs to be really, because at the end of if you look at all the presentations that have made here and the previous sessions, it is the community that has come together in one form or the other in a multi-sectoral way, or what we call cross-sectionality, to make that provision. So I do not see any global policy on what we mean by inclusive understanding, because we don't have a global understanding, a common understanding of it, although individually we might. And if in doing that, we would put the community up front, along with persons with disabilities and the family members and all that. But the intersectionality has to be recognized, be it the disability movement, or the women's movement, or the ethnic minority movements, whatever the movements are, intersectionality at the center of it. Intersectionality plays out in mechanisms of delivery, in multi-sectoral collaboration and cross-sectional, etc., what Mr. Musharraf talked about. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Let's take one more question or a brief comment, and then we'll turn to the panel. I know there's a hand up there. I can see it against your hand there, sir.
Hello.
Good. So,
Hello.
oh, there's another person. Fine,
Okay,
please.
thank you so much. I am Laura Porcil of ASEAN Disability Forum in the Philippines. I would like first to thank Her Highness for this occasion, and I would like to highlight the excellent presentation that I have ever heard about children with disability. Number one, I want this occasion and the group of panelists to go around the world and speak what you have spoken of. I would like to highlight Article 3, letter H of the CRPD. Respect for the evolving capacity and the choice identity of children. I would also like to highlight Article 23 of the CRPD on the right for home and family. The speakers today highlighted that, and I would like to honor them because the home and the family, the parents, are most important in order for the children to grow, respecting the inherent dignity. It is the parents' role. And it takes the whole community, the whole country, the leadership of the country to develop persons with disability right from their childhood, from their family and their parents. And I would like again to highlight my thanksgiving to Her Highness of Qatar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have had two very excellent comments and observations just now from the audience, and I'm aware of the time. I think that we probably don't have further opportunity for comments from the audience unless the organizers give us one more chance. Can we do one more? One more. Okay, so please, one more. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this great conference. And my name is Sharif El-Bindi. I am from Qatar Foundation, employee, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Anyways, so I wanted to ask, coming from a background of education in America, I was put through a normal mainstream school and everything. And I feel like the centers that are, and I'm talking about the permanent centers that are used for special needs children are should be more used, their services should be more useful in actually mainstream schools, like what is in America. You know what I mean? And how it's, and I feel like for it to be in a different building as all the other schools defeats the purpose of integration, because the kids don't really see each other and there's no social interaction between both sectors of children. So what do you guys think? I would like to ask the panel.
Okay, so that's a great question, and actually probably has a rich set of answers from the panelists. So let's have that be the last question. Thank you for it. Jemana, will you talk about this notion of integration and mainstreaming, is how it is worked in Palestine with your experience, and then we'll...
Yeah, in fact, it's a very important question you raised, and in fact, all our kids are included in the education system, all of them, kindergartens or schools. Also, sometimes we face difficulties with the parents when they want to go. I mean, it's the right of the child. Although Palestine signed the agreement for children to be included in mainstreaming schools, yet with the if the parents go, most likely they won't accept them. Therefore, with mothers, usually we fight for the rights of those kids. All of them supposed to be in regular schools, and it is for both sides. I mean, for typical kids and children, special kids. They are. It's for the benefit of everyone. So yes, I do agree 100% with you, and our center has the same policy. Yeah.
We've just gotten the notice of time from the organizers, so there is more to say on that extra question, and the two comments earlier from the audience. We thank you for that and the prior questions. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be here this morning, and thank you for your attention.
نتوجه بالشكر لكم على مساهمتكم القيمة وتعقيباتكم المميزة. السيدات والسادة، والآن مع استراحة قصيرة على أن نعود لاستكمال الجلسات بعد نصف ساعة.